Joining us now to pick up on those themes articulated by the two congressmen, here with our daily intelligence briefing, Fred Fleitz, the chief analyst for LIGNET, and Lisa Ruth, a former CIA analyst and current analyst likewise for LIGNET. Lisa from our Florida newsroom, Fred Skyping in from Washington, D.C. To you both, we thank you so much for coming back here to America's Forum. Now, let's first start with the investigation into that horrible ISIS video. Fred, what is the latest on, now they're calling him a rapper. Initially, they were calling him John the Beetle. Who is the guy? What do we know about this guy?
JD and Lisa, it's great to be here. Well, he appears to be a British rapper. His name is Abdel Majed Abdel Barry. He is a naturalized British citizen of Egyptian descent. His father was a terrorist who tried to blow up embassies and was involved in the blowing up of embassies in Kenya and Tanzania in 1998 and is awaiting trial in the United States. He was extradited from the UK. What's troubling about this is that there are many of these British jihadists who have passports. As Congressman Rogers said, they're just one plane ticket away from coming to the United States. I think that just makes this ISIS threat so much more dangerous.
And again, just to amplify this, Fred, what Mike Rogers was saying yesterday was not just a Sunday show soundbite or talking point. You would agree with the House Intelligence Committee chairman that what we have going on in terms of our policy allows ISIS to be just a plane ticket away, literally.
I think that's exactly right. This administration has been incredibly neglectful of what's been going on in Iraq after we pulled our troops out in 2011. And the president has just simply been determined to do nothing, basically nothing about the situation in Syria. That created power vacuum that led to the rise of ISIS.
Lisa, to you, we are hearing that our British cousins with their organizations MI5 and MI6 have worked overtime via voice recognition to make the ID on Jihad John, we'll call him. Do you know what other steps have been taken by the British intelligence community or our own to catch this likely beheader?
I don't know for sure what they're doing, but chances are there's a lot of liaison now operating. In the United States, I'm sure the advisors on the ground, the British, anyone else in the area are probably cooperating to try to find where he is. But keep in mind, the ability to, when we talk about catch him, we've had a very limited ability to catch any of these guys thus far. Once they identify him, now the question is, what do you do about it? And unless he tries to leave or comes to a U.S. controlled area, it's really fairly limited. That said, I'm sure there is a high level of cooperation among the intelligence services now to try to figure out where he is and what the next steps are.
Well, in terms of steps this nation might take, Attorney General Eric Holder had some things to say about the investigation. Let's take a listen to what he said last week.
And those who would perpetrate such acts need to understand something. This Justice Department, this Department of Defense, this nation, we have long memories and our reach is very wide. We will not forget what happened and people will be held accountable one way or the other.
Well, the one way, Lisa, seems to be that General Holder and others in the Justice Department and the administration as a whole want to treat this as a criminal case rather than an act of war. Does that make any sense in the here and now?
If you look at the Obama administration has done this, they've been trying to try terrorists in civilian courts. The intel community's view often is what types of intelligence can we get from these people? And if you arrest them, read them their Miranda rights, frankly, and extradite them to a U.S. civilian court, the ability to collect intelligence is limited. So from the intelligence community standpoint, what they would like to do is get any intelligence they can get first before putting them in a civilian court. That said, the Obama administration has made it very, very clear. Nobody else is going to be going to Guantanamo, and they are going to try them in civilian courts, not as war criminals or foreign terrorists.
Fred Fleitz, I want to get your thoughts on that because you're familiar almost scouting out the intelligence on the political landscape in Washington. But there's something else that apparently has just happened today. Fred, you'll recall that extraordinary press conference last week at the Pentagon where the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Martin Dempsey, talked about the ISIS threat being imminent. Apparently this morning he has pulled an about face. What would account for his change in language? A lecture from the commander-in-chief? Your take on those two episodes vis-a-vis Washington and all the political, the hidden political traps, if you will.
Well, concerning trying jihadist terrorists as a criminal matter, at least is exactly right. But I think what General Dempsey said is really extraordinary. He made the cardinal sin last week, I'm afraid, of telling the truth, the unwelcome truth, that we're not going to defeat ISIS unless we attack them in Syria. And I would go further than that. I don't think we can defeat them just with airstrikes, as the general said. I think we may have to send U.S. Special Operation Forces into northern Syria to help take out their locations. You may remember during the 1990s, airstrikes was barely enough to combat the Bosnian Serbs. They used human shields to defend their positions. Knocking out ISIS is going to be complicated, and it's going to involve a massive air campaign if we're serious about it, both in Iraq and Syria, and we may have to have some boots on the ground in northern Syria.
Speaking of Syria, on Friday, General Paul Vallely, a Major General retired from the U.S. Army, with his organization Stand Up America, he gave us some breaking news out of the region from his intelligence sources. Let's listen to what he told us on Friday.
Syrian airfield with MiG-21s was captured by ISIS. 1,200 of Assad's men also were captured at that time and are being retained by the ISIS forces. So here you have an airport now that's been taken down by ISIS in Syria. And this is a critical matter.
So you've got that. We had that story Friday. Major media groups didn't report it till yesterday. Does that make a profound change? Fred, is that why you're saying you may in fact have to see special forces on the ground in Syria from the United States?
It was a stunning development, and it was great that Newsmax TV had this first. They took the Topka airfield in northern Syria against the Assad forces. And it's interesting, Assad tried to lay a trap for us, thinking that we would intervene to fight ISIS in Syria. But I think ISIS has gotten too strong for Assad, and he now desperately wants us to help him. And we now have a terrible dilemma. Either we let ISIS thrive in Syria, we might roll it back in Iraq, and it may take over the Assad regime, or we kill it in Syria, and we cement Assad's control on the Syrian government. They're both terrible choices, and we're in this situation because of policies by this administration of neglect that created this disaster.
Well, speaking of the administration, our commander-in-chief back in May made it clear that he did not see a need for us to go into Syria. Let's listen to President Obama from this spring.
I do not foresee a scenario in which boots on the ground in Syria, American boots on the ground in Syria, would not only be good for America, but also would be good for Syria.
So you had that from the president in May. Last week in the press conference, Chuck Hagel pretty much danced around the topic. Lisa, is there a way to get this done without, quote, special forces, but with intelligence operatives, thinking back to the early days post 9/11 in Afghanistan, to where rhetorically at least there would be some wiggle room for the president when it came to American military on the ground?
I think that I completely agree with Fred, absolutely 100%. The Syria situation is just, it's really key here. And I don't think we can beat them, if that's the right word, just with intelligence. I think it's going to have to be boots on the ground. And going back to the air base, you can look at this in terms of lessons learned here. Assad did finally, after waiting for the United States to respond, and we did not, but they did launch airstrikes against ISIS. It did not succeed. We can't win this war with airstrikes. We can't defeat ISIS with airstrikes. And I think that we're going to have, again, in terms of if we're going to defeat them, it has to include some kind of troops on the ground, coordinated, of course, with intelligence.
Lisa Ruth, Fred Fleitz, both of LIGNET, we thank you for your time and our intelligence briefing, as always, for in-depth analysis and forecasting on ISIS and terrorism and other risks around the world, check out that website, LIGNET.com. And as always, we want to get your take on major stories of the day, including this one. Why don't you tweet me your remarks at Newsmax TV?